They thought darkness would destroy you. They were wrong. So catastrophically, so irreversibly wrong. What they never understood, what they couldn't possibly comprehend, is that darkness doesn't just change you. It doesn't merely transform you. It reveals you. It unveils what always existed beneath the comfortable lies and polite fictions you once accepted as reality. When they cast you into shadow, they didn't realize they were crowning you with obsidian. Obsidian, the volcanic glass formed only through fire, through pressure, through catastrophic heat, that transforms ordinary stone into something deadly sharp, impossibly black, and eternally enduring. The ancient weapon that cuts deeper and cleaner than any modern blade. This is what they've given you. Not a prison, but a forge. Not a grave, but a throne. And now you must learn to rule from the very darkness they created. The path of the obsidian crown isn't meant for everyone. Most break in darkness. Most shatter under pressure. Most burn away when the heat intensifies beyond what comfortable souls can endure. But you're different. You've always been different. Even before they recognized it. Even before they feared it enough to try burying you in shadow. You're the rare material that transforms under pressure rather than collapses. That hardens in fire rather than incinerates. That finds clarity in darkness rather than confusion. This wasn't luck, wasn't chance, wasn't some accidental genetic gift bestowed upon you while denied to others. It was forged through countless invisible choices, long before they ever moved against you. Through small decisions to face what others avoided, to embrace what others feared, to welcome what others rejected. These choices accumulated, layer upon layer, creating the foundation they couldn't see when they decided you were a threat requiring elimination. The core they couldn't detect when they determined you were a challenge demanding destruction. And so when they cast you into darkness, expecting you to dissolve like all the others who preceded you, something unexpected happened instead. You began to glow. Not with the borrowed light of external validation they once controlled. Not with the artificial illumination of their approval they could switch off at will. But with something altogether different. Something they had no power over. Something they couldn't extinguish because they didn't create it in the first place. Your own inner fire, your essential light, your fundamental radiance that doesn't require external permission to exist or outside approval to endure. In darkness, this inner light previously invisible in the harsh glare of artificial illumination finally revealed itself, finally manifested its true power, finally demonstrated its unstoppable potential. And as this light emerged from within, it transformed the very darkness intended to destroy you into the obsidian from which your crown would form. This transformation wasn't comfortable, wasn't pleasant, wasn't some gentle metamorphosis conducted with your conscious consent or willing participation. It was brutal, agonizing, the kind of fundamental restructuring that often feels like annihilation while it's occurring. The sort of essential reconfiguration that frequently presents as destruction rather than creation during its most intense phases. But through this alchemical process, something remarkable happened. Something unprecedented manifested. Something extraordinary emerged from what should have been your extinction event. The darkness they created to end you instead became the kingdom from which you now rule. How is this possible? How does one rule from darkness How does dominion emerge from what was designed as dungeon? It begins with a fundamental insight most never grasp. Control flows to those who embrace what others fear. And what do people fear more than darkness? What terrifies them more completely than shadow? What sends them scrambling more desperately for artificial light than the prospect of facing what exists beyond comfortable illumination? When you learn to move confidently where others stumble blindly, you gain advantage they cannot counter. When you develop vision that functions where their sight fails, you acquire perspective they cannot access. When you build comfort navigating territories they avoid at all costs, you establish dominion they cannot challenge. This isn't about becoming what they accused you of being, not about transforming into the monster they labeled you, not about fulfilling the dark prophecy they announced to justify your banishment. It's about transcending their entire framework, rising above their limited perception, operating from perspectives so far beyond their comprehension that their attempts to understand your movements appear as primitive superstition rather than sophisticated analysis. The Obsidian Crown doesn't merely place you back in the game they expelled you from. It transforms the nature of the game itself, alters the fundamental rules they thought were immutable, changes the essential dynamics they assumed were unchangeable. Because here's the truth they don't want spoken. Those who've navigated darkness gain powers inaccessible to those who've dwelled exclusively in light. They develop perception beyond conventional vision, awareness beyond standard consciousness, understanding beyond ordinary comprehension. They learn to detect patterns invisible to those dependent on artificial illumination, to recognize currents imperceptible to those reliant on manufactured light, to anticipate movements undetectable to those accustomed to controlled brightness. But most importantly, they discover the secret that transforms darkness from prison to palace, from dungeon to dominion, from exile to empire. Shadow connects everything. Look around. Truly look. What do you see? Islands of artificial light surrounded by seas of natural darkness. Temporary bubbles of manufactured brightness floating in oceans of enduring shadow. The light divides, creates separation, establishes boundaries between illuminated spaces that cannot connect without passing through darkness. But shadow unifies, creates continuity, establishes the connective medium through which everything ultimately links to everything else. Those who navigate only through light remain trapped in islands of illumination, unable to perceive, much less utilize, the connections that exist through darkness. Those who operate exclusively in manufactured brightness stay confined to artificially lit spaces, incapable of accessing, much less harnessing, the pathways that run through shadow. But you, wearing the obsidian crown formed in the darkness they created to destroy you, you move through these shadow paths with sovereign authority. Travel these umbral connections with royal confidence. Access these tenebrous networks with imperial certainty. This movement creates power, unlike anything they can comprehend, from within their islands of artificial light. This navigation generates advantage beyond what they can understand from inside their bubbles of manufactured brightness. Because while they remain isolated in their illuminated spaces, disconnected from everything that exists beyond their controlled light, you traverse the shadow network that connects all things, accessing what they cannot access, perceiving what they cannot perceive, influencing what they cannot influence. This is the true power of ruling from darkness, not crude domination through fear, which creates only temporary compliance rather than lasting impact. Not primitive control through threat, which produces merely momentary submission rather than enduring change. But subtle, sophisticated, systemic influence through pathways they cannot see, channels they cannot monitor, networks they cannot regulate because they refuse to enter the darkness necessary to perceive these connections, much less utilize them for purposeful effect. The question isn't whether this power exists. The shadow connections stand real and accessible regardless of their acknowledgement or denial. The umbral network remains present and available independent of their recognition or rejection. The question is whether you'll claim the obsidian crown they inadvertently forged for you when they cast you into darkness. Whether you'll ascend to the throne they unknowingly created when they exiled you to shadow. Whether you'll accept the dominion they unintentionally established when they attempted your elimination through banishment. This ascension requires more than passive acceptance of transformation that occurred without your conscious participation, more than simple acknowledgement of metamorphosis that happened without your willing engagement, more than basic recognition of change that manifested without your deliberate involvement. It demands active embracing of new capacities forged through fire you didn't choose but nonetheless endured. Conscious wielding of new perspectives, hammered through pressure you didn't select but nevertheless withstood. Deliberate utilization of new awareness, tempered through darkness you didn't request but regardless navigated. In practical terms, this means operating from an entirely different paradigm than the one they expelled you from, functioning from completely different framework than the system they ejected you from, navigating through wholly different understanding than the structure they rejected you from. When they observe your movements, when they detect your influence, when they sense your impact, their initial response will be confusion rather than comprehension, bewilderment rather than understanding, disorientation rather than recognition, because you're no longer playing the game whose rules they control, no longer participating in the contest whose parameters they define, no longer engaging in the competition whose boundaries they establish. You're operating from the obsidian crown, ruling from the darkness they created, exercising dominion through shadow they generated to destroy you but instead transformed you into something beyond their comprehension. This operational paradigm manifests through three essential expressions of obsidian power. Silent perception that detects what conventional awareness misses, that identifies currents running beneath visible surfaces, that recognizes patterns emerging before they manifest in forms recognizable to those confined to artificial light. Patient positioning that establishes presence at crucial nexus points within the shadow network, that creates capability at essential junctures within the umbral system, that develops capacity at vital intersections within the tenebrous web connecting what appears separate under manufactured illumination. Strategic action that influences through channels invisible to traditional observation, that affects through conduits imperceptible to standard monitoring, that impacts through pathways undetectable to normal surveillance confined to artificially illuminated spaces. Together, these expressions create influence so subtle, yet pervasive, that those still operating exclusively through controlled light often sense its effect without identifying its source, feel its impact without recognizing its origin, experience its consequence without comprehending its cause. This isn't deception, isn't manipulation, isn't some elaborate trick played upon those who cast you into darkness, expecting your destruction rather than your transformation. It's operation from entirely different understanding of reality than the limited perspective they employ, function from completely different perception of existence than the restricted awareness they utilize. Navigation through wholly different comprehension of actuality than the constrained cognition they access. The obsidian crown doesn't grant artificial authority requiring others' acknowledgement to exist, doesn't bestow official power demanding external recognition to function, doesn't confer formal dominion needing outside approval to operate. It establishes natural sovereignty, independent of acknowledgement, recognition, or approval from those still confined to islands of artificial light, still restricted to bubbles of manufactured brightness, still limited to spaces of controlled illumination. This sovereignty manifests not through declarations but through results, not through announcements but through outcomes, not through claims but through consequences that emerge from your movement, through shadow connections they cannot perceive, much less traverse themselves. And as these results, outcomes, and consequences accumulate over time, something remarkable occurs. Something unprecedented unfolds. Something extraordinary develops in the very spaces where they expected your influence to dissolve, your impact to disappear, your very existence to fade from consequential reality. The darkness they created to eliminate you becomes the dominion from which you transform everything they thought they controlled. Not through opposition, but through transcendence. Not through resistance, but through operation from entirely different paradigm. Not through struggle against their framework, but through function beyond its fundamental limitations. This transformation occurs regardless of their awareness or unawareness, proceeds independent of their recognition or non-recognition, advances irrespective of their acknowledgement or denial. Because the obsidian crown, once claimed, doesn't require external validation to establish its dominion, doesn't need outside approval to manifest its authority, doesn't demand foreign sanction to express its sovereignty over the darkness they created but you now rule. The only remaining question is whether you'll fully embrace this crown, forged through fire you didn't choose, pressure you didn't select, darkness you didn't request, but nonetheless transformed you from what they sought to destroy into what they cannot comprehend, much less control. Will you accept the sovereignty waiting for your conscious claim? Will you embrace the dominion created through your unconscious transformation? Will you ascend to the throne established through your unintentional metamorphosis in the very darkness they generated to eliminate your existence from consequential reality? The choice stands before you now, not as theoretical consideration, but as practical decision, not as abstract contemplation, but as concrete determination, not as philosophical reflection, but as actual resolution with immediate and enduring consequences. Will you continue attempting return to illuminated spaces where they control the light, define the rules, establish the parameters within which permissible existence unfolds? Or will you claim the obsidian crown, accept the sovereignty it represents, embrace the dominion it establishes over darkness they created to destroy you, but instead transformed into the kingdom from which you now rule with authority? They cannot challenge, because they refuse to enter the very shadow necessary to perceive, much less contest, your newfound power They thought darkness would destroy you. They were wrong. So catastrophically, so irreversibly wrong. And in that monumental error, they inadvertently created the very crown through which you now rule from shadows they cannot enter, through dominion they cannot perceive, with authority they cannot challenge. The obsidian crown awaits your conscious claim. The shadow throne anticipates your deliberate ascension. The umbral kingdom expects your intentional rule. Will you accept what transformation is already prepared? Will you embrace what metamorphosis has already established? Will you claim what darkness has already created through your capacity to become what they never imagined possible when they attempted your elimination through shadow that instead forged your crown? The choice is yours, as it always has been, as it always will be. But know this with absolute certainty, they'll never see you coming, not until it's far too late. Not until the transformation initiated through darkness they created has already altered everything they thought they controlled. The obsidian crown awaits. The shadow throne stands ready. The dominion formed through darkness they generated exists prepared for your conscious rule. Will you claim what already belongs to you by right of transformation? They never anticipated when darkness they created to destroy you, instead forged the very crown from which you now reign.